Good morning, everyone. My name is John Sears. I'm the Admin Services Coordinator for Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. Welcome to Office Essentials. Today we're going to be talking about Power Automate. So what is Power Automate and what can it do for us? Before we get into it, I just want to say Power Automate of anything that I have talked about or will talk about as part of this series has the most potential to radically transform the way you work. It has the most potential to create efficiencies in what you do. It's the only thing I've ever taught people about and then have them get back to me and they're like, oh my God, why did it take me so long to get into this? This changes everything. Um, Not that people haven't been like, John, those Outlook tips you gave me were really fantastic, but never have they been like, this will change everything. So not to oversell Power Automate Essentials, but today's training, we're going to learn how to build a Power Automate script, and hopefully at the end of it, you'll feel more comfortable with trying Power Automate yourself and exploring all that it can bring. So what is Power Automate? Power Automate allows you to conduct an automated series of actions in the Office 365 ecosystem without having to build an elaborate coding system or doing things in Visual Basic. It's a front end way for creating a series of actions. So what do I mean by that? So there are three different ways that a Power Automate script is triggered. They are triggered by specific actions. So there are like a list of things that might be a triggering action. So an example of that might be receiving an email. It might be the submission of a form. So triggering an action and then a series of things happen after that. They can be scheduled actions. So items that are conducted on a regular schedule that you can determine to have something occur, and then push button. So basically, I push button, it does thing. There is an entire universe of things that you can do in Power Automate. There are already a bunch of templates available on Power Automate that you can explore and customize for your own needs, from basic things like saving Office 365 attachments to OneDrive automatically. So I don't have to hold on to emails, right? I just have this set up so that attachments automatically go to my OneDrive. Sending a new customized email when a SharePoint item is added. Starting an approval workflow when a new item is added. There's a bunch of stuff on there that after we're done here, I encourage you to go explore and see what's out there. So, okay, well, that's fine, but how are you supposed to understand what you're supposed to do from that? So, uh, basically, we're going to talk through what is a flow. We're going to talk about how to manage a flow, talk about what connectors are. We're going to show a little bit about how to build and edit a flow. We're going to talk a little bit more about templates, and then we're going to build a flow together. You can follow along at home, and then we're going to talk a little bit about best practices. So, when I say a flow, what do I mean? So a flow describes a discrete series of triggered actions. So you might have a triggering sequence and then a bunch of things that happen after it, or a scheduled event with a bunch of things that happen after that. Under your My Flows, you'll see all of the individual flows you have. This is just a selection of mine. Some of these are automatic triggered actions. Some of them can be scheduled actions, basically all of the different triggers together. For each trigger, basically, you're going to have a series of actions, and each flow is one of those items. So what can a flow do? Well, it all comes down to connectors, and connectors basically say these are the things that Power Automate can interact with. And there are a lot more than even what you're seeing on screen. You'll notice that a couple of these items are premium. One limitation to the standard Power Automate that we have access to is that we can't touch SQL servers, but there are ways around and above them. So we use SharePoint lists to function as databases. Basically, In the government client, we've got two universes. We've got everything within the government client and everything outside of the government client, because you might see some things on here that definitely aren't in the government client. Instagram, Facebook, Trello, Twitter. These things can interact with each other, but they can't cross over. So if you want SharePoint to talk to Outlook, to send emails, to create planners, to create triggers based on Microsoft Forms, you can do that, but you can't have Microsoft Forms create an Instagram post. But you could, but there are ways around that, and we won't get into that today, but there are certain bridge actions that you can take to kind of leap that. But you can see here, this is just a snapshot of some of the things that Power Automate can interact with. And just based on this, you can see that there's a lot of flexibility and capability within the Power Automate system. So once you have created a flow, you'll have this flow management screen right here. This flow management screen includes the name of the flow, when it was created. We talked about connectors, so all those connections that exist within that flow are visible right here. So you can see this particular flow is linked in with approvals, so you can automate approvals in Power Automate. It's working with Microsoft Forms. It's connected to Office 365 groups. It'll also show you the run history, so you'll know every time that it's run. That's really useful for triggered actions or even scheduled actions to make sure everything flows. And it'll give you your testing history if you've been testing it, your regular run history if you've got it, or if your flow fails for some reason, it'll tell you. You can turn a flow on and off. When you want to get into edit the flow, you can just click this little edit button right here, and it takes you into the flow editing. So what does an actual flow look like? We've danced around it for a little bit. This is basically what you're going to look at. So flows are really simple. They're a visual design of how these tools interact with each other. Basically, it's just a series of steps that you can define. It's as simple as hitting a plus sign here and then telling it what the next thing you want it to do is. And it's really easy to see visual representation of what a flow is doing. So in this case, we have a triggered flow. I can tell because it triggers when a new response is submitted. So I can tag a particular form, and when a form is completed, it's going to get the response details. So it's going to pull the information out of that form. It's going to create a new item in a SharePoint list. So that's why it says create item. So it's going to append the information from that form to that SharePoint list. Again, that SharePoint list functions as our background database. We've talked about lists. So we're automatically creating and updating that. We've already created that list, and now we're automatically adding a new record to it. And then we are grabbing the user profile of an individual. In this case, I believe it is actually grabbing the person's supervisor, and then it's setting up an automatic approval. So it is sending a request based on the form to send to the employee's supervisor to approve the thing that they've requested through the form. And once that approval happens, we can go back and update that item that we already created a record for, because each one of these steps basically creates a field of variables that we can access later in the flow. So when we got the response details here, we basically have all of the fields from that form available in our Power Automate script, so we can grab them. Just like we can grab the approval status here and go ahead and update the item with it. And then once that item's been approved, we can create an event, an actual like scheduled event that goes out to an entire group of people. So it's extremely, extremely powerful. This is just one example of how a flow is, how it's structured, and you can see really easily what's happening in each of these, and each one of these can be expanded, like this one, where you'll customize, okay, that's the form that I wanted, and that's the response ID. So this particular flow is how I manage my admin team when they request leave from me. So I built a form so that they can request leave. I have the approval set up only so that I'm made aware that they're requesting to leave, not because I actually intend to decline. But all of their leave requests are automatically stored. So I'm building a data set of leave requests that I can reference in future years. And I'm creating a group event so that I am creating a schedule that everyone can see on my team of when people are in and out of the office. And I don't have to do any of that, right? All they have to do is submit the form, which only has like 3 fields. And then all I do is get the approval so that I know that they're going on leave, and then I hit OK. And then everything else happens automatically. That's the power of Power Automate. So I mentioned templates earlier. They're a really good place to get started with Power Automate because it automatically sorts them by what are the most commonly used Power Automate scripts. Like the most common one here is this Office 365 save email attachments to OneDrive. If you're overwhelmed keeping a whole bunch of emails because you really need those attachments, don't worry about it anymore. Just open this flow, turn it on for yourself, and never have to worry again about holding on to an email just because it has an attachment you're worried about, because it will be in your OneDrive. That's just one example. There are a whole bunch here, and it's really a great place to go ahead and get started because the flows are basically already built, and maybe you'll want to customize it. Maybe you'll want to add an extra step. But usually the default is really, really good and really, really useful, and it'll help you kind of understand the scope of what Power Automate scripts are capable of. So now we're going to go ahead and get into the exercise. So one of the best things about Power Automate is its ability to run on a schedule. So we're going to basically build a scheduled notification of a quarterly event being held in 2 weeks. So maybe you have a report that's due quarterly and it takes about 2 weeks to prepare. So you want to send everyone that's responsible for creating that report an email every quarter, 2 weeks out from the thing happening, that you need the report to be generated. So you notice there are 2 links here. So there are actually 2 domains for Power Automate that we have access to in state government. One is the kind of like default non-government account. That one has a limited number of uses, like actual runs of flows. The only reason why I share it here is because it has access to the full range of templates that are available. So what I recommend is you go there to look at templates and kind of see what Power Automate is capable of, and then you can always export them to the actual government client, which is this make.gov.powerautomate.us. So I ask everyone that's here, if you can, I'm going to go ahead and share this in the chat. Hop on to Power Automate and follow along at home. So we're going to go ahead and jump on Power Automate. So when you go there, you will end up here to create a flow in Power Automate. We're just going to go ahead and hit create. And this will all be saved on YouTube, so you can always go back and try this again if you're not in a position right now with your screen situation or whatever, to follow along at home. So the first thing that's going to ask you for is either your trigger or a template that you want to start from. So in this case, we want to update people quarterly that something is happening. So that can be either. So my question to you is that a automated Cloudflow, so triggered by a designated event, triggered manually as needed, or a scheduled Cloudflow where you choose when and how often it runs? Does anyone want to type an answer in the chat or answer me?
Scheduled Cloudflow.
Scheduled Cloudflow. Great, Lars. Awesome. So I just went ahead and clicked that. It will prompt me for the flow's name. So I'm going to go ahead and call this test. We will pick when we want it to run, which in this case, so we're going to want it to run quarterly. Let's say we want it to run basically, so let's say we need it on 1/1, right? So we want to pick a date that's about 2 weeks out from that. So let's go ahead and run it on the 14th at 10 a.m. We don't want it to repeat every 1 minute. We want it to repeat every 3 months, because every 3 months would be 4 times a year. And we're going to go ahead and create. Okay. So you can see right here, it starts you with whatever that triggering action is. In this case, it's the scheduled reoccurrence. The interval is every 3 months. You can expand this stuff to show more information. You designate your start time. By default, it's in Zulu. So you might have to do a EST to GMT correction. You can also specify your time zone if you'd like to. But 15 Zulu is about 10 a.m. because remember we set it at 10 a.m. You can see it automatically translated to 15 Zulu. So that part's fine. It's going to be running every 3 months, starting 12/14. Let's go ahead and do a new step. So basically it'll be running on the 14th every 3 months. Now, we want to think about how we want to alert people that the report is due. So the most common way that people interact with their work is through email. So if we want to send them an email, it's as simple as going into the search here. You can see it will list basically everything, and it'll start off with just a bunch of random stuff. The easiest way to find stuff is by typing into search for what you want to do. So if we want to send an email, we could just type email. It'll do a filter for it. You want to try and avoid this generic mail thing if you're operating within Office 365. And the second option that shows up here is this Outlook send an email, which is exactly what we want to do. So we want to send an email. So to begin with, we can specify who we want to send it to. Now we can either just start typing emails. So if I want to send this to Lisa.write, as I start typing, it'll filter down the list. So I can just do that. Or it can find people that aren't in your domain too. So if I just want to send it to my own Gmail, do that. You could specify the subject. So let's do a report. And then you get into the body of the email. So by default, it'll pop out this little bit right here. So this is the part where it's trying to find content from earlier in the form. Now, we don't really have much in the way of content in this form. So there's no dynamic content coming up. But what we do want to do is we want to look out 2 weeks from now so that we can tell people when the report is due. So one other option here is expression. And we want to basically do a date calculation. Now, this part works kind of similar to an Excel formula. The formatting is a little different than an Excel formula, so you might end up having to Google the specific formatting of the thing that you're trying to set up. But in general, you can kind of start looking through here. There's conversion functions, there's math functions, date and time, which is what we're looking for. So we'll need to know the current date. So we'll need UTC now. But we're going to be doing a date calculation, so we're going to be adding days. So we're going to go to add days, and it kind of shows you the format where it's looking for timestamp and then the number of days and then the format. So in this case, we're going to be clicking UTC now because that is how you get the current timestamp. And then we want to go into the number of days. Now, as I start typing it, you see it kind of gives me additional information about what I need to type in order to make it work. So now it knows that days are required, the number of days to add, In this case, we want 2 weeks, so I'm just going to put 14. We can either choose to specify the format or not. This is one of those things where you might have to look up to make sure you're putting it in the correct format. In this case, I believe it's the single parentheses, and then it's, MM, might be lowercase m's because uppercase m's are minutes, slash day, slash year. And you'll see it adds that as like a little function statement. So basically, we are adding 14 days to the current date when this script is run, and we can go ahead and we can add additional information here. So we can say, I'm going to go ahead and your report is due there. Don't forget, here's a link to the report. Blah. And then we can always go ahead and customize it. So basically, we're creating the email that's going to go out on a quarterly basis. So we can go ahead and specify the target of the link. So google.com, we'll open in a new link, add. So you can format this just like you would a normal email, and you can add additional content here. And if we go ahead and expand, so there's advanced options, you can specify CCs, BCCs, you can add attachments, you can add importance or sensitivities. So let's say that email is fine, and then we want to add a new step where, let's say we want to record that we sent out these alerts. It's as easy as typing in SharePoint. So you can also click on these and say, okay, I just want stuff that's in SharePoint. Show me all the SharePoint stuff that's available. We might want to, you can see there's tons of stuff here. We might want to update a file that says, and it's really, really smart. It'll find stuff for you. So when I go to update a file on SharePoint, it'll give me a full list of all the SharePoint sites that I have. So I want to go to FPR Forestry Division team. It will try and find content in there. You can specify the file, so it'll grab all the files that are available in that SharePoint site. So it's really, really smart and really, really good at finding stuff. I think that'll do us for the building stage of our work here. One of the most common things I use Power Automate for is I really, really love building a form and using that form as a trigger for an action. So people will send in content via the form. The data from that will automatically via Power Automate go to a SharePoint list. And then once that SharePoint list is in place, you can do a ton of things with it. You can create a Power BI dashboard, which we're going to talk about next session, that runs off of that SharePoint list that creates a dashboard for people to see the work that's going on. We've used that a ton for collecting invoices. So you would basically input the basic information you need to complete the invoice. You can even upload the invoice itself in the form. It'll automatically send that invoice to the business office to the correct destination based on the information that's in the form. So there are decision trees that you can have in Power Automate. So it can do one thing with one set of conditions, another thing with another set of conditions. It's really, really cool, really, really flexible. And as long as you're having one Office thing talking to another Office thing, absolutely explore the uses for it. One thing I've been helping a lot of people with is building a SharePoint list that basically keeps track of when people have to know things. And basically you build it into a SharePoint list, and then Power Automate goes in every day, checks who needs to know what, and automatically sends them emails saying, hey, just so you know, this thing is due in 2 weeks. And because it can automatically query information from a SharePoint list, execute on information in that SharePoint list, such as sending it to the people that it's connected to. I have a Power Automate script that's set. So basically, when people send us license and special use permit requests, it generates an email that gets sent to me. So I am having Power Automate triggered based off of those specific emails. It will parse information in those emails for the town that it is referencing in that email, go to a SharePoint list, compare that town to the list, find the place in that list where that town is referenced, and then send an email to that particular record in another column. It's the only limit is your imagination and some Power Automate functionality, but everyone that has given this a try, that started poking around, that started exploring it, really, really finds it transformative. So best practices. Don't automate waste. So don't, if you're dealing with a big, complicated, messy process, which doesn't feel efficient already, Power Automate's not going to make it better. It can automate stuff, but it's bad practice to automate waste. So consider looking at the process when it's appropriate to do so. Revise the process first, knowing that Power Automate's in your back pocket to make the process work better, and maybe even design your process around having it run off of Power Automate. I'm really bad at this, but you saw how each of those individual steps had a default name associated with it. You can customize those, and you can be far more explanative about what a step does, because you can create names for those steps. An individual flow can be actively running for up to 30 days. So for example, I have that approval workflow where it won't take the next steps in that until it's approved. Now, I'm always going to approve time off within that 30-day window, but if I don't, the flow will fail because it'll only wait 30 days for me to do that authorization. So there are ways around that, such as using multiple flows, so that triggering action, if you're not convinced that it will be done within 30 days, you can still send an approval and then set up a triggering action of an approval happening. You can drag and drop, so that when those steps happen, you might find yourself having to move them or replace them. That can get complicated when you're referencing items in it further down. There's also something built into Power Automate called scopes. They don't perform any actual like task, but they can be really useful for organizing your flows, because when you start getting into the big complicated ones, it can get really messy. Elizabeth, thank you for sharing. There's a ton of resources from Microsoft about how to do Power Automate stuff. I've been working with Elizabeth and Paulina about getting Power Automate invested in the work that we're doing. If you have to do anything on any kind of regular basis, either every time an email comes in or every time a certain date is reached, think about Power Automate and ask yourself, do I need to do this, or can a robot do this? That's really what we're talking about here. So we're at time, but are there any questions before we wrap up for today? Okay, thank you all so much for your time today. I hope this was enough to get you started on the Power Automate swing of things. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and I will see you all in 2 weeks when we'll be talking about Power BI. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Joe.